It is a cold, bitter cold, windy day outside, so it's the perfect day to stay close by the wood stove and kind of dream about warmer weather. Of course, for me, I'm dreaming about snow. I'm hoping I get some snow. I don't think I'll get any with this storm that's coming. By the time you watch this, the storm will have already been through, but I know a lot of you are going to get snow. But I think mostly for us it'll just be rain this time. But winter's not over yet, so I'm still hopeful that I'll get some before winter's over. I'm going to read to you out of the big book today, out of the Dictionary of Southern Appalachian English. I'll put the link to that book in the description below if you'd like to find a copy for yourself. We're going to focus on the letter E today, share some of the words that start with E and phrases that start with E. This first one is each and every is a pronoun phrase. Everyone, one and all. 1913 Cape Art, our Southern Highlanders, is the example or the source it gives. Fields and give it out to each and every that Walt and Laney or to wed. So she was saying that they ought to get married. Each and every, instead of just I would just say to everyone. She told everyone they ought to get married. Anyway, that's an interesting one that I've not really heard here in my area of Appalachia. Although probably where he was documenting it wasn't that far away from here. It's just the difference as time goes by, there's less of those old words and phrases going. Each one, a pronoun phrase used immediately following a corferent noun or pronoun. Thus, we each one equals each one of us. 1942, in 1987, Purdue outwitting Devil. This was the example. They each one had half of the gold tied around his waist. 2009, Holbrook, I only regret that I didn't know them each one. I didn't throw them each one out a window. Throw each one out a window. So that one's still fairly common where I live in my area. That one I still hear. This next one is not unusual other than the way you might hear someone say it. So it's just your ear, but you might hear someone say year, like with a Y, year. And some of the examples, let's see, we'll go, well, it starts out in 1789, all the way back that far. We'll skip ahead to 1989. Landry, Smoky Mountain interviews, if he was working, give him 12 years of corn. So not 12 years, 12 ears are in corn, thinking about 12 ears of corn. So that's not one that I hear on a regular basis other than someone being silly and like trying to be comical and say years. Is your years a-burning? And they're just doing that because they've heard their grandpa or somebody like that say that. It's not one that I hear often at all, and even if I do hear it, it's always like in a teasing, just because they're trying to be cute, saying years, but everybody knows they mean your ears. The next one, I really like this one. I don't hear anyone, I've never heard anybody say it, but it's early candlelight. And it makes sense that this one would fall out of fashion because people are not using candles for their lights these days. We just flip a switch, most of us. But early candlelight, it's a noun phrase, dusk. So 1899, Frost, Southern Mountains. Another ride would bring us to our third schoolhouse where we would speak, take supper in the neighborhood, and preach at early candlelight. 1961, Medford, History of Haywood County. Then there was preaching at 8 and 11 a.m., at 3 p.m., and at early candlelight. So it's just using that to describe a time of day so that everybody would know when to gather, like in those examples at church. But isn't that a pretty poetic way, early candlelight, like when you'd first need it, right before you'd need it, I guess. I really like that. This next one's interesting. It's another ear, but an earmark. And I know you're familiar with what an earmark is, but this is interesting because it talks about it in relation to animals. This was in the days when your animals, thinking about hogs primarily, could roam around free and go where they would, and then you would gather them back up when it was time to slaughter hogs. But you needed to know, well, if yours is roaming around eating off the mast of the forest, then so's your neighbors and that neighbor. You need to figure out whose is whose. So they would mark their ears, their years. They would mark them. So 1948, Dixie Frontier. When first turned out, the hogs were marked with certain cuts in the ears, and these marks were registered. That's how you kept them. You had to go register. How you knew whose was whose. The following earmark recorded in the court records of Pulaski County, Kentucky is typical. On motion of Peter Kimmy, his earmark, to wit, a half crop in the right ear and a swallow fork and undercut in the left ear, is ordered to be recorded. That's so fascinating that they would get that detailed of how they marked them. But if everybody's marking their ears, their hog ears, then you'd have to come up with some new ways to do it. 2003, Smoky Mountain News. The hogs ranged the woods communally most of the time, so that their owners had to pay them little or no mind. In order to recognize which hog was whose when rounded up, each farmer's animals were documented via distinctive earmarks, that is, various combinations of slits, notches, and holes cut into their ears while young. Really fascinating, just a different way of life, of course. Today people still raise hogs, but you can't let them just roam around. In those days there was so much more free open land. There was less people in the settlements, as Pap would say. So just a different time, but interesting to look back at that. This next one is ease, verb, in phrases ease around, ease in, or ease off, ease over, to slip about, move, or without someone knowing you're moving, kind of slipping in and out, ease in that manner. 1940, Hans Hawks Dunn. The old man and Ad kept easing off by the littles till they finally went on away. Now, I love that, just the image of that, but I love more than ease, because that just seems so normal to me. They were easing off. They was easing off out of the driveway. But by the littles, I like that part. So just a little at a time. You know, you picture them, maybe they went to the front porch, and maybe they went down the steps and talked a little bit, and then they maybe went out to the, mailbox or something, or the road, and then before you knew it, they were gone. So I like that one. 1995, Adams, Come Go Home. He started to ease off to the side, trying to get a car between him and the wild Chester. Chester started easing over to the table, talking kind of low and soothing like. So that one's just really common. I bet that one's common no matter where you live, not just in the mountains of Appalachia, but everywhere. Easement, I like this one. Noun, relief. Easement is relief. So you think about an easement now, makes me first think of surveyors and things like that. But relief is what it would mean. 1914, Furman. When my first little gal come along, I named it Evie, thinking to give her some easement or pleasure. And then 1957, Combs, just in a word list, it meant relief. Ease, not a legal term here. So relief or ease. Easement, I like that. Easement. I don't use it, and I've never heard anybody say it, but I like it. Now, I have heard this next one from older people. Easing powder is a noun, an opiate, often, a powder form used for headaches, and often construed as a count noun, hence plural form, easing powder is a little bit, same as resting powder. So 1913, Capehart, our Southern Highlanders. Can't you uns give her some easing powder for that hurtin' in her chest, So easing powder, when I first think of that, of course, I think of like BC powders or Goody powders that you might take for your headache. 1995-97, Montgomery Collection, easing powders known to Brown, and they thought it was aspirin and similar medicines, as have you got any easing powders? I've got a headache. That was Cardwell. So easing powder, I have heard that one. Easter bush, I can't believe as fast as time goes by, before you know it, it'll be Easter. So an Easter bush is a forsythia bush. 1944 Hayes word list, Easter bush equals forsythia. 1960 Stubbs Mountain Wise. It is readily seen from its blooming season how forsythia acquired the name Easter flower or Easter bush. So that one's, and I still hear that one. I've heard a lot of older people call forsythias Easter bush in the same way I've heard them call daffodils Easter lilies, or Easter flowers. Right along to go along with that is Easter winter. For terms describing a similar phenomenon, see blackberry winter. I've got a video about all the little winters, and I don't think I might have mentioned Easter in it. I can't remember. It's been a while that I've done it. But it does seem like every Easter you have a little cold snap of weather. And usually that means maybe if you had a new Easter dress that didn't have sleeves in it or something, then you wake up on Easter Sunday and you're going to go to church and it's too cold. You got to put on a sweater and cover up because it's too cold. Another one, not ease like we were talking about over here, but just easy. And there's several different ones, but I'm just going to go down to the number 4, the 4th entry, is comfortable, relieved of pain, discomfort, or anxiety. And that one is so much like what I've heard Pap and Granny both say that one when they were, had been real sick, or maybe they were having some pain. Maybe Pap was having angina pain or something like that. And then, they're feeling a little bit better, and you might ask them if they're okay now, or, how you feeling right now or something. They say, oh, I'm easy now. I'm easy now. Like it's eased off. So Beckner, Shane interview, he continued his hold until she would submit. I've said all I want to say, or I feel right easy. Sounds like there's more to that story, doesn't it? Let's see if we can find another one. Here's one, 1985, Irwin, Alex Stewart. 30 minutes after I'd pulled a tooth, I went to getting easy. So after he'd pulled his own tooth, he went to getting easy. Can you imagine pulling your own tooth? Pap had told me about a time that when he was just a young boy, I don't know, I guess 12, early teenage, something like that, in that area. And he had a toothache, and it was hurting him. And one morning he couldn't sleep because it's hurting him bad. And he got up and he slipped out, eased out, is to use one of these words, but slipped out and went across the gap of the mountain over to his grandpa and grandma's house. And just, I guess, to see if they might help him with his tooth or whatever. And his grandpa said, well, Jerry, you just have to pull it. That's all that, we just got to pull it, and I can't hardly stand to pull it for you. So he got Pap set up. Pap said back then most people have like an old sliver of a mirror on their porch where they washed up and maybe where the men could shave. And got him up in front of that mirror and got him some pliers and helped him get a hold of it, and then told Pap he'd have to pull. He just couldn't bear to do it to him. He'd have to pull. And Pap said, I pulled, and then next thing I know, I was on the ground. He passed out. He couldn't pull it. It hurt so bad. And somehow him and the grandma and the grandpa decided no matter what it took, they was going to get him to a dentist, and they did, and he pulled the tooth, and then it got better. But one of his dear friends, Elsie Chastain, Pap would tell this story about Elsie, about how tough he was. He said one time they were trucking, and they were going kind of together in different trucks, but big trucks, 18-wheelers, whatever, up towards Maryland, up in there somewhere. And Elsie had a toothache, and they stopped at a little truck stop or whatever, stopped to get gas, whatever they had to do, and he told Daddy he thought he was going to pull it, and he went in there and he got him some Listerine, bought some Listerine. He got the pliers and he sterilized them, rinsed his mouth good with the Listerine, and then he pulled his tooth. And Daddy said, he was tough, way tougher than me. And he rinsed his mouth out with the Listerine and said it felt better already, and they got back in the trucks and they went on. So I always think about that. There's lots of things that are bad if you have pain, but a toothache is just terrible. And especially if it's one that just won't go away, that you just can't go away unless usually you do get it pulled, or you have to go to the dentist, let them fix the cavity or do a root canal or whatever it is. So I'm like Pap, I'm not that tough. If I tried to do that, I'm sure I'd pass out. This one is interesting. It's eat, just the word eat. but the usage that it describes, and it's really a long entry, but it's because we use it the wrong tense of the word. That's basically it, just the use of that. But it's interesting, the whole thing is, because of how it, just how often it is used and how far that usage goes back, if you will. So let's read some of them. This one is 17, and also it also mentions, I should say that before, is you might have heard this, or maybe heard somebody teasing saying, and I hear Matt even uses it teasing, but instead of have you eat yet, or we already eat, they say et instead of eat, like have you et yet, or we already ate. Are you hungry? We'll get you something to eat. Or get you something to eat, or at, either way you wanted to say it. Anyway, so 1799, we all eat our breakfast and sat out on the line, went 3/4 of a mile. That was Ellison. Let's skip down here. 1861, Lance, Civil War letters. We stayed in Charleston 2 nights and ate at the hotel. 1862, Robinson, Civil War letters. You wrote something about baking me some bread, but he never said any about it, so I expect he ate it. I don't know exactly what that means. That was just telling about what had been going on. 1922, Tennessee. We slept in the open, had no tents, eat when we had anything to eat. 1940, Holmes, Hawks Done. I didn't ask Tiny if she ate breakfast before she left home. So see, that's just so common. That's what I would say. I didn't ask Matt if he ate before he left home. I wouldn't say if he ate. I'd just say eat. We just use eat. Hall Phonetics, 1942, Smoky Mountains. For 8, the historic, it is universally accepted as correct to et in a few individual cases. 19, so it's just still talking and documenting about the usage there. Let's go to the next page. It's a really, really long entry. 1961, I've eat many a times over there. Again, exactly what I would say. I've eat many a times. I've eat soup beans many a times at Granny's table. They ate with the Winchester across their laps, carried them in the courthouses when they started court. Now that would have been a scary courthouse to be in, wouldn't it? 1973, Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Back when I was a kid, there was a lot of families that ate cornbread 3 times a day. Back when I was a kid, there was a lot of families that eat cornbread 3 times a day. I've had a lot of people leave comments on our videos and say, do you eat cornbread every day? Not every day, but pretty much. 1980, Miles, Verbs in Haywood County. She eat them Sunday and she eat them yesterday. As again, I would say, that's the way I would say it, whatever I was talking about. 1989, Mate 1, we raised what we eat, and we had as much to eat through the Depression as we had any other time. 1998, she eat a pretty fair breakfast, and she seemed to be pretty pert. Always, when you read these sources, it always makes you want to know the rest of the story. So maybe she had been sick, and now, so he was saying, she's doing pretty good this morning. When I was a growing up, you know, we raised everything we eat. Crockett narrative, this is 1834. We had just eat our breakfast when a company of hunters came to our camp. 1862, Martin letters. I have eat so much nasty beef that I am ashamed to see a cow, and it almost makes me sick to see a cow. So they had eat some bad beef, it sounds like. Now, 1862, Robinson letters. Philopiner is not well at this time. She ain't ate anything hardly since I saw you. This part's interesting. 1934, Carpenter, Archaic English in West Virginia. Quite often we hear eat in the past tense and past participle when ate and eaten are proper. This unchanged inflection of eat is also found in Shakespeare. In Much Ado About Nothing are the lines, time hath not yet dried this blood of mine, nor age so eat up my invention. So that's fascinating. That's just showing how long it's actually been, that usage has been around, if you will. 1976, Lindsay, Grassy Balls. I reckon the stock kept the weeds out. 1984, another Great Smoky Mountain National Park. I thought that was the best stuff that I've ever eat. Again, we would say that. Mate 1, again, 1989, she'd cook beans and then she'd take the beans after we'd eat from them and she'd mash them up and make bean cakes out of them. I've never had bean cakes, but a lot of you have told me how good they are. I need to try that. Montgomery Collection, 1994, I had eat dinner and got to started shoveling and my knees got to shaking and I just sat down there on something, a lump of coal. 2008, Rosie Hicks, we had too many, you know. We could not get them eat. That, again, is very familiar as something that we would say if maybe we had a lot of oranges at Christmas, but we eat them up. Or maybe if you didn't eat them, you'd say we had a lot of oranges at Christmas and we just hadn't been able to eat them up. So both of those are very, very common. Then there's another section to this, that same eat, is senses. To have a certain taste when consumed, be suitable for consumption, especially in phrase eat good, to be tasty or appetizing. 1862 letters, Epperly letters. We can get blackberries sometimes to bake pies. They eat very well. Now, 1864, I cooked a mess of my peas today. I tell you, they eat fine. I bet if you watch all of our videos, you've heard Matt use eat in that manner. He says that's him. That's what he would say. They eat good. 1939 Hall Collection, Hartford, Tennessee. He said, I'll guarantee you in the morning I'll eat just as good as it is now. It'll eat just as good as it is now. It'll eat just as good as it is now. 1973, Great Smoky Mountain National Park. They, ramps, it's talking about ramps, eat better than an onion. It's almost ramp time too. It will be before we know it. 1974, Fink's Mountain Speech, bear meat eats good. 1985, Irwin, Alex Stewart, didn't you ever eat dried blackberries? They eat good. 1952, or this is another, one more variation of using the word eat, is to chew tobacco. Now, I've never ever heard these, even though those others are so familiar. 1952, Callahan, Smoky Mountain Country. Most of them choose tobacco. They often called it eaten tobacco, supposedly because they swallowed some of the juice, and a great number of the women either smoked a pipe or used snuff. I can't imagine they drank very much of the juice. Looks like that would make them sick. And then there's another one after that usage of to chew tobacco, which I've never heard, to furnish a family with food or feed. 1913, Morley, Carolina Mountains. The land is so good that 2 or 3 acres of it will eat a family. I've never heard that. And then I've never heard this one either, is the last one, is to take medicine, to take your medicine. You eat your medicine instead of take your medicine, like we would say. Lowry, folk medical term, to take a pill or tablet. I eat my medicine every night. I've never heard that one either. Never heard that one. And I'll leave you with this last one, which is just continuing with the eating, but it's eatest. Now, there's so many of those like that. Anything about it you could think of. Swim, sing, fight, crochet, anything, and just add est to it, and then you make that, like whoever is the swimmingest, is the singingest, is the dancingest, then they're like just the best at that. That's just all they do, and they're so good at it. So this is the eatinest adjective, inclined to consume food frequently or in large quantities. 1979, Melton, Upon My Honor. Besides being the eatinest set, they was allers having somebody to fetch and carry for them. So sounds like in one way a fun bunch to be around if they's always the eatinest, but then they's always having somebody go fetch and carry for them. So maybe they were just being a little bit lazy there too. I'd say Matt's one of the eatinest people that I've ever seen, ever been around. He really has a big appetite. He works hard, though, and expends a lot of energy. He always has, but he really, really enjoys eating. And Pap did, too. Pap was like that. He had a big appetite and enjoyed eating. My brother Paul does. He's like that. I'm funny that I never liked to eat much. When I was young, I wished that I could just somehow take something, like eat my medicine like that, take a pill, and then I just wouldn't have to eat. I just didn't have much of an appetite, and sometimes eating was difficult for me, and if I couldn't think of exactly what I wanted to eat, then I just didn't want to eat. I just didn't want to eat anything. I just not to eat anything, even if it was hours and hours, I just wouldn't eat. And Pap worried about me. He thought that I was afraid that I would get overweight. It wasn't that. I just was, that was, when I was growing up was the time when people with really serious diseases like bulimia or anorexia, that those were really in the news a lot, and I think he was afraid that I had something like that, but it wasn't that. I didn't even ever think about anything like that. I just didn't have any appetite. But he used to try to encourage me to eat before he'd let me go somewhere. Now, you ought to sit down here and eat. You eat you a meal before you go. It was just that I just wasn't interested in food. I just didn't have much of an appetite. Probably when I got to be all the way into maybe my 40s, that's when my appetite finally kicked in. And I still like to have, if I can't, sometimes I get in moods where if I can't think exactly what I want to eat, then I'd rather just not eat anything. But I have much more of an appetite than I've ever had, so that's a good thing, I guess. And maybe someday I'll be like Matt and be the eatest. I don't know. I don't know about that. I hope you enjoyed reading out of the big book today. I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me which one of these words and phrases you're familiar with. Maybe you've heard them. Maybe you hear them all the time in your area. Maybe your parents or grandparents or aunt or uncle or somebody said them. Or maybe you've never heard them. But I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me. And I'm always glad when you stop by to help me celebrate Appalachia. And talking about Appalachian language is something that's really near and dear to my heart. I'm just plumb foolish about it. Even those words that I've never heard, I don't know anybody that says them. I just love that they were documented and that they were popular enough in certain areas that they ended up in a dictionary. And then I'm also equally just as excited when I find out from one of you that folks in your area or in your family are still using them.